For 3 long years, back in the late 1980s, a string of terrifying unsolved murders haunted the beautiful parkways of coastal Virginia. Then, for decades, nothing. The case went ice cold. But now, in a breakthrough that is just stunning, investigators finally have a name. Let's dive into the story of how a killer was unmasked and the incredible mystery that still hangs over this case. So let's just get right to it. January 2024. The news that everyone had been waiting for decades finally broke. At a press conference, the Virginia State Police and the FBI put a name to the phantom who had terrified an entire community for over 30 years. And that name, well, it brought both a wave of relief and a whole new set of questions for the families who had waited for so long.
And this statement from the victims' families, it just says it all, doesn't it? Can you even imagine, for almost 4 decades, just living in a complete vacuum of not knowing? So while this announcement was a huge relief, believe me, it was not the end of the story.
So who was he? Who was this guy? Well, authorities announced that thanks to advanced DNA testing, they had identified Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. He was a local waterman, a hunter, who died of cancer back in 2017. The killer had been living right there among them the entire time and died without ever facing justice in a courtroom.
Now, the DNA evidence was incredibly precise. It locked Wilmer to the murders of David Knobling and Robin Edwards, and it even solved a completely separate 1989 murder. It also, and this is crucial, created a forensic link to the disappearance of another couple, Keith Call and Cassandra Hawley. But as you're about to see, this only answered part of the puzzle, and in a way, it actually made the whole thing even more mysterious. To really get why this breakthrough is such a huge deal, we have to go back. We have to rewind to the 1980s, to a time when this quiet, incredibly scenic road, known for its beauty, became a literal hunting ground. You know, the setting here is basically a character in its own right. The Colonial Parkway is remote, it's winding, and there are absolutely no streetlights. It was the perfect spot for young couples trying to find some privacy, which, tragically, also made it the perfect spot for a predator to strike, completely unseen. Okay, so this timeline shows the 4 double homicides that are considered the core Colonial Parkway murders. From 1986 to 1989, 8 young people were targeted. First, Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dowski. A year later, David Knobling and Robin Edwards. The next spring, Keith Call and Cassandra Haley just vanished. And then finally, Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps. It was a 3-year reign of terror. Now, one of the things that just drove investigators crazy for years was the inconsistency. The crime scenes always felt staged. You know, cars with the wipers still on, keys in the ignition. And the methods were all over the place. Strangulation and slashed throats for the first victims, then gunshots for the next. This constantly shifting MO made it almost impossible for police to know if they were even looking for a single killer. So you've got almost no leads and all of these contradictions. What happens? The case becomes this breeding ground for theories. Investigators, the public, everybody was trying to find some kind of pattern in the chaos. And really, 2 big theories started to dominate the conversation. On one side, you had the rogue cop theory, or someone pretending to be one. That would explain why there was so little struggle. But on the other hand, you had the fisherman theory, based on things like nautical line being found and the fact that the bodies were always near water. For more than 30 years, this was the most important number in the entire case, 0. Just think about that. The number of official suspects named, the number of forensic links connecting all 4 of these horrific crime scenes. And for the families, it was the number of answers they had, 0. And that fisherman theory, well, that brings us right to the man at the center of the 2024 breakthrough, Alan Wade Wilmer Sr. As it turns out, that theory was right on the money. Locally, everyone knew him by his nickname, Pogey. Wilmer was a waterman, a hunter, he even ran a tree-cutting business. And here's the real kicker. This guy wasn't some ghost. The police actually considered him a prime suspect way back in 1988. Get this. The authorities were watching him. They knew about his very distinctive blue pickup truck, his boat, the Denny Wade, and they even knew he had a reputation for approaching couples on the Parkway. But after he passed an FBI polygraph test, a tool we now know can be totally unreliable, he was cleared, and the investigation just moved on for decades. So you've got to be asking, what changed after all that time? Well, it's a one-word answer: technology.
Decades later, cold case investigators took a fresh look. They used forensic techniques that just didn't exist in the 80s, testing tiny DNA samples from multiple crime scenes. And the results? They were undeniable. They had their man.
Okay, so you think, great, case closed, right? Not even close. See, identifying Alan Wilmer didn't actually close the book on the Colonial Parkway murders. In a lot of ways, it just blew the whole mystery wide open again. This table really breaks it down. We have a confirmed solid DNA link to the Knobling and Edwards case, right? And a forensic link to the disappearance of Colin Haley. But what about the very first murders of Thomas and Dowski and the very last of Lauer and Phelps? There is no forensic evidence tying Wilmer to them, which raises an absolutely chilling possibility. Was there more than one predator stalking that parkway? And then there's one final and honestly pretty controversial detail. Authorities have said that Wilmer's DNA profile will not be entered into CODIS, which is the FBI's national DNA database that automatically checks evidence from crime scenes all over the country. What does that mean? It means that if Wilmer was responsible for any other murders in any other states, those cases might never ever get solved. And that's the question that now hangs over this decades-old case. One killer finally has a name, and that brings some measure of justice to some of the families. But for others, that vacuum of the unknown is still there. Was Alan Wilmer Sr. the lone Colonial Parkway killer, or does another phantom still haunt that quiet Virginia road? The one thing we know for sure is this mystery is far from over.